A new poll this morning. Oh, good, my daughter's awake. Okay.
Oh, good. And they always text her.
Thank
you. 01. Yeah, exactly.
A new poll this morning from Marist College gives voters latest opinions of the Trump presidency. Nearly a week after ordering military strikes in Syria, the president's approval rating stands at 39%, up 1 point from late March, while the percentage of those who disapprove is down 2 points to 49%. 56% of Americans favor limited U.S. airstrikes on military targets in Syria, but 59% don't believe President Trump knows what he wants the United States to do there. Just 34% believe he has a plan. 49% disapprove of how Trump is handling foreign policy. That's a 7-point improvement from February, as 40% approve, up 3 points. As for the impact of his decisions, 40% of Americans say he is strengthening the U.S. on the world stage, up 5 points. 49% say he is weakening the U.S., which has fallen from 56% earlier. However, only 42% have trust in him to make the right decision in an international crisis. 55% do not. 39% trust him to weigh all the options before acting during a crisis. 58% do not.
You know, there has been, obviously, it's safe to say we're in a period of transition. And I think sometimes...
And you can see that in those numbers.
There's a leading sometimes they're leading indicators, sometimes they're not. I know the Gallup poll has Trump up 5 points over the past week. Not as much movement in the Marist poll, but obviously a lot of people, Mark Halpern, still waiting and seeing how this turns out.
This poll is in line with most of the others, which is the events of the last week, as much as they've gotten acclaim on foreign policy particularly, did not revolutionize what people thought of the president, but you see incremental improvement. And I think it's going to reinforce for the White House what David wrote in his column, which is, as he moves to be a more establishment figure, at least on foreign policy, does he see positive reinforcement, and does he continue in that direction, and does he extend that when Congress comes back to things like health care or tax reform?
All right, David Ignatius, you write this in a column called "Trump Gets a Taste of Success." Trump is making gains because he has assembled a competent national security team and listens to its advice. There was a consensus among his top advisors for a quick, limited strike on a Syria airbase, and Trump took the recommendation. He didn't amplify, augment, or otherwise disrupt it with his own tweets. He allowed the process to work. If Trump goes back to his freewheeling tweeter-in-chief role, or if the disruptive would-be chief strategist Stephen K. Bannon regains influence, then chaos could return. But for now, Trump has bonded with his core team. Over the past week, Trump has adopted a different approach, more careful and consensual. Yes, it brings him closer to the foreign policy mainstream that he and Bannon derided during the campaign, but it also gives him a taste of the success he craves.
You know, I've had a lot of people, David, call me up going, but what are you thinking about all of these changes? And they expect me to go, oh, I'm shocked.
Everyone's still in critic mode.
It's kind of like having somebody invest your money in the stock market and they've lost your money for the past 60 days.
Right.
And suddenly they start, like, you know, making great investments. I'm not going to criticize that. We've all prepared for Trump the disaster, Trump the, you know, how do you handle Trump the success if we keep moving in this direction?
Well, we'll see. I think the public is right to be skeptical. Those numbers were interesting. You know, greater support, but still a lot of misgivings reflected in those numbers. It's clear to me that Trump has bonded with this core group, and you'd list his Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Certainly you'd list his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, as a kind of in-house whisperer to the president. You'd list the new Deputy National Security Advisor, Dina Powell, and her boss, H.R. McMaster. And when you have a crisis and you do well at solving it, there's something that happens. I think we all know that in life. You just bond with the people that you're with, and you say, God, we can do this. And that's what I think we've been watching over the last week. They could still begin to rattle apart. The Bannon issue is unresolved. They've got to get that sorted out. And I think the president could come back to being the disruptor. Something goes wrong, he has surprises, he reacts, kind of doubles down again.
Tomorrow, Saturday morning, you never know.
Well,
even a holy weekend.
When he gets up in the morning, it's a new morning.
It's a new morning.
So, but
yeah,
you
but
have to say,
he's reading columns like this.
so he's reading. He's getting approval. He is on one level the king of the flip-flop. You have to say. His positions on key issues are now radically different from what they were during the campaign. But he's also becoming a credible leader in foreign policy with a strong team and, I would say, some real successes.
He also, it's very interesting with Russia. David, you had said early on when Trump took the call from the Taiwanese leader, throwing China off is not the worst thing in the world. They're always throwing us a bit off. I think Trump proved you right by a very positive meeting with the Chinese that came over, and then they get to go back and say, we sat down with this guy that was talking to Taiwan, and look, we had a great... Russia, we're hearing the same thing about Russia. Ambassador McFaul, who has long been a Trump critic, actually said Vladimir Putin thought he had a dupe in the White House. Tonight, Vladimir Putin is scratching his head going, what the hell do I do next? And Julia Ioffe writes this in The Atlantic, the American airstrike on the airbase in Syria didn't do that much. A day and 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles later, Assad still is in power. His planes still taking off, still flying, still dropping bombs, still killing people in the same province where a Syrian gas attack killed more than 80 people last week. But what the strike did do, though, was radically alter the power dynamic between Moscow and Washington that Putin had spent the last 3 years establishing. One in which Putin acts and Washington, gobsmacked, scrambles to react. It is now Putin and his government that is reacting, and he is learning the same exact thing that Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and all of these people that thought they were so much smarter than dumb Donald Trump learned in the campaign.
So somebody in the White House said to me over this last week, so the Russians are catching for a change rather than pitching. And the Russians have been pitching. They've been calling the shots, and now they're having to react to U.S. policy, and that's precisely what Trump wanted, and I think that it has real benefits. Just would stress on China, the fact is that Trump had to pay the ticket of admission.
Yes.
Trump started off destabilizing him. I'm going to revisit the Taiwan issue. And the Chinese said, well, President Xi is not going to talk to you. He's not going to pick up the phone and talk to you until you clarify that. And I'm told that Trump in a White House meeting said, so clarify.
Yeah.
Meaning, so get it done. If this is what it takes to have this dialogue, then let's get it done. And that's when this begins. But it did mean backing off of some of his early rhetoric.
But big picture, Willie, when we look at the week that was, and of course tomorrow's Saturday, and you never know what could happen. But in this moment, you see Trump actually following through on something he always said he would do, especially on the world stage, and that is always keep people guessing. And Russia right now is in the position to be most surprised because for months he has been vexing the entire media community and the world community as to why he's so, what's the word, almost positive and at times ridiculously positive about Vladimir Putin.
Obsequious.
Obsequious.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, things have changed.
And the same could be said for China, the way he's spoken about China. I mean, remember, the entire premise of his campaign is that we're getting screwed and ripped off by China and their bad actors and their currency manipulators. That all changed after the meeting with President Xi.
Sure
now
did.
He's saying they're not currency manipulators. He's also moving carrier groups up toward the Korean Peninsula, sending messages to North Korea. So, John Heilman, I would just go to you and talk about David Ignatius' point about who the president's actually listening to right now, and it does appear to be that tight inner circle. Steve Bannon looking to be marginalized. I think Donald Trump would tell you, yes, Bannon helped me become president. But the decisions that he's made in the early days on the Muslim ban, the travel ban, on the health care repeal, all those things that didn't pan out, his loyalty certainly has limits, and he wants to go with people who are going to get him wins, which he appears to have gotten at least a couple of them on the foreign policy front this week.
Right. And I think, you know, for a lot of people, Willie, who are concerned about Donald Trump as commander-in-chief. Certainly people who on the left side of the political spectrum, but also a lot of people on the mainstream conservative side of the political spectrum, they look now at the notion, as John McCain said to us last week, that the biggest thing that he took out of the Syrian strike on last Friday was it looks like Donald Trump is listening to the generals, and that gives me cause for some degree of greater comfort and confidence. And I think that that's true, as I said, across much of the mainstream political spectrum, that you may disagree or agree with any given policy decision or preference that those people have, but people like McMaster, people like General Mattis, these are serious people, sober people, and the fact that Trump seems to be leaning onto them now in a way that he wasn't necessarily before gives you some sense, not just that he's becoming a more conventional president potentially, but also one who understands that he knows, to some extent at least, he's starting to know what he doesn't know.
And you know, Mark, a week after the strikes, some media writers will oversimplify this and say, oh, it's just about the strikes. People are no. It's great comfort from what he said about NATO, the fact that Russia is back on their heels, the fact that we actually have a stronger relationship with China after he was promising 40% tariffs, which I've got to say, knowing Trump, we said in real time, that's
opening bid.
That's the real estate developer's opening bid. You go in hard.
Same
you
with
go
Putin.
in tough.
Was this opening bid?
Yeah, and it could be the same thing with Putin.
He's taken advantage of the fact that Congress is away. He's got the stage to himself. He's made pronouncements this week on a bunch of issues. But I think the thing you said about Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush, particularly Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, is exactly right, which is Donald Trump uses carrots and sticks. Most of us, most human beings have the capacity, if you're dealing with somebody, just carrots or maybe just sticks, because that's the mode you're in with them. You're in a good mode with them, in a bad mode. He can do carrots and sticks one day simultaneously. And you look at now, the relationship with Russia and China totally flipped. China now, he's very close to, good personal relationship, talking about working together, which will come to a head this weekend on North Korea potentially. Russia, he was obsequious before, now very tough. Keeping people unsettled, but being willing to switch on a dime, that is the way Trump's always been, and it's worked this week on foreign policy.
David, scared the hell out of the foreign policy community and the world and our allies. But again, it's a big but. If this is what it leads to, then that's a positive thing. We just, again, like you said before, we don't know what's coming next. We do know, though, that he's listening to the right people.
His people would make the argument that some disruption was necessary, that people were so comfortable with their expectations about what America would and wouldn't do, and we were just sort of fixed in place and in people's minds. I'm struck by the way in which Trump is playing a game that I remember from Richard Nixon, which is the game of a triangular world with the U.S., Russia, and China, and you sort of play one off against the other, and you move back, and you move forth, and constant dialogue, you leverage one against the other. That was what Kissinger thought was the heart of good policy in a period after Vietnam, when the U.S. was sort of weak and struggling to find its way back, and Kissinger had this vision, and I think he's been feeding some of that to Jared Kushner, who I can't help but see as Kissinger's kind of a protege in this White House, and saying this game of nations is the way you want to try to gain greater leverage.
Yeah.
All right.
And it makes perfect sense. As you know, those two have been talking for 6 months now. And I remember, again, coming on before, when he put China off guard early on, you said the same exact thing. To play them off, keep both of your rivals off balance.
This is absolutely, lesson one of Kissinger's statecraft, and it's clear that Jared Kushner, and I think it's also clear that President Trump has understood that, internalized that.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.